so first of all, it's called the Cartesian plane, but what is a Cartesian plane? Cartesian plane is the same thing as a coordinate plane or a rectangular coordinate system, okay? Hopefully you remember that the x-axis is your horizontal axis, the y-axis is your vertical axis, okay? Your quadrants start in the top right corner, that is 1, and then they go counterclockwise, 2, 3, 4. Where they cross is the origin, okay? So yes, I'm going to ask you to plot points. Plot those points and then label which quadrant they lay in. All right, this is where they should be. A, top right quadrant. And if I asked you what quadrant it's in, you'd tell me what? Quadrant 1. I don't care if you use the numbers or the Roman numerals as long as you understand that VI or IV is 4, okay? Because if it's a multiple choice question, you got to know that that's what that is. But if you want to use your regular numbers, that's totally fine. All right, B, -2, left 2, up 3 would be in what quadrant? Quadrant 2. C, to the right 2/3 down 3 would be quadrant 4. D, 0, 3. Y-axis. So it doesn't lie in a quadrant. It lies on the axis. We give it its name. E, -3, 0. To the left 3 would be x-axis. Good. And F is called origin. Perfect. All right, here's the application of it, right? So determine which quadrant satisfies the given information. For number 1, we want to find where x is greater than 0 and y is less than 0. So if you want the visual, like I'm a visual person. If I want a visual, right, and I just do the first part, where in my quadrants would x be greater than 0? 1 and 4, the right-hand side of my graph. Good. And then separate it out. Where would y be less than 0? 3 and 4, underneath the x-axis on the bottom, right? So because this is an and statement, what would be the answer? Quadrant 4. All right, 2, x times y is less than 0. What kind of number is less than 0? A negative. So we're looking for a product that's less than 0. For a product to be less than 0, what has to be true about the signs of the two things you're multiplying together? Good. 1 positive, 1 negative. So if you think about what's happening in your quadrants, in the first quadrant, they're both positive. In the second quadrant, what happens? Negative x, positive y, and that would result in a negative product. So that's one of my answers. What happens in the third quadrant? They're both negative. That product would be positive. And in the fourth quadrant? Positive x, negative y. So there's my other negative product. So this is quadrant 2 and quadrant 4. Good still? Questions? All right. So we're going to get into scatter plots. This is one of the things they'll call them stat plots when we get into the AP content. But you basically are going to learn eventually you're going to learn how to even plot these using your graphing utility. We won't get there yet. But you'll learn how to plot these using your graphing utility. Okay? And then they're always going to ask you how to infer stuff about the pattern you're seeing. So I would say that there's, on the free response part of your AP, there's going to be a lot of what does this mean in this context, okay? And this is where I'll train you, but you'll learn how to describe the data in words, okay? So if I was given this graph, it would have come from data that would have either been like x, y, like this, in which my x is my horizontal, so this would have been hours of study, or y would have been test scores. And sometimes you will see the chart be vertical like that, and sometimes you will see it horizontal. So it would be hours of study, and it would be test scores. And then you'll see a bunch of information that would result in these dots, okay? So then when it asks you to infer something about this, or what does it mean in this context, it's talking about the overall shape of your dots, right? In this case, those green dots. This is not a perfect line. It could kind of be linear. We're going to talk about regressions and stuff in the future. But for now, what I'm looking at is what's happening to those green dots. What's the overall pattern as I move from left to right? It increases. So when I say, what does it mean in this context? You would literally use the words as the hours of study increase, the test scores increase. So when it uses the words in this context, you have to include the subjects. You have to include hours of study and test scores. Okay? It will also call this input and output. So the X is your input, the Y is your output. And it will also refer to it as an independent variable. So what you're plugging in is your independent one. And what you're getting out of it is your dependent. So again, eventually we'll call this a stat plot, but it's the same concept. Those are little dots that represent your data, okay? And then we're eventually going to talk about something called a regression. This would be like the best would be like a linear regression. What kind of shape does it take? It could be linear, quadratic, all this sort of stuff. And we'll do a lot of that stuff in your graphing utility. All right, you make one. Draw it from scratch, okay? Make sure you label it, and then tell me what you can infer from this stuff. I would say plan ahead. Don't start by going by ones if you've got to get to 87. That would not be fun. Feel free to go in intervals. All right, so your overall shape should follow something like this. Obviously, how you did your intervals could be different from mine, which is totally fine, as long as you get some sort of a pattern like this, okay? As long as make sure your axes are labeled. So like if you have to do this on your quiz and you don't put chapter on the bottom, there goes a point. So you got to be careful, okay? You want to make sure you label your axes. You want to make sure that you plot your intervals. And you go by, like, it doesn't matter if I'm going by ones on the x-axis and by twos on the y, as long as I'm consistent. And then you want to plot your points, obviously. So what's the overall pattern here? What happens to those dots? It decreases, not perfectly, like there's a dip at chapter 3. Maybe that's homecoming or maybe that's a really hard chapter, okay? But there's a dip in chapter 3, but the overall pattern is decreasing. So we would say as the chapter increases, or as the chapter increases, or as the chapters increase, that doesn't matter, the test scores decrease. Two formulas you need to know. Remember yesterday we said that there's no reference sheet on your AP exam, so you'll never get given formulas, okay? The distance and the midpoint are things you have to know. The distance between 2 points, which would also give you the length of a segment. Is the square root of x2 minus x1 squared plus y2 minus y1 squared. And for those, you'll get either, like a square root is a perfect square. You can simplify, a square root. Or if it's something that can be simplified, it has to be simplified. So that's another thing that's like across the board, AP testing, everything gets simplified. Every square root, every fraction is always simplified. It doesn't matter if it's decimal or fraction when it comes to midpoint. Like if it's 3/2, you could leave it as 3/2. You could write that as 1.5. You could write that as 1.5. It doesn't matter, okay? But if it's 6/4, it has to be simplified to 3/2. So your midpoint, you add the 2x's divided by 2. You add the 2y's divided by 2. All right, so example 4 says, find the distance and the midpoint using the given points. I'll do A with you, and then I'm going to have you do B. It doesn't matter which one I call ones and twos as long as I'm consistent. So I'm going to make this x1, y1, x2, y2. And for distance, I get the square root of 4 minus the negative 3 becomes plus 3 squared. Plus 2 minus 2 squared. Square root of 7 squared plus 0 squared. Square root of 49, which goes back to 7. Then I'm going to find the midpoint. So add the 2 x's, divide by 2, add the 2 y's, divide by 2. I get 1/2, 4 halves, which is 1/2 and 2. And again, that could be 0.5. Another thing that like a rounding rule is 3 decimal places. That could be either rounded or truncated, okay? Which you'll hear me say a million times between now and May. But for now, we want to keep them exact, so we want to keep it in fraction form. All right, you do B. All right, so we should have gotten square root 10 for your distance, and then for your midpoint, negative 3 halves and 7 halves. And again, leave them just like that, okay? You don't need to convert them into a mixed number or into decimal form, okay? If you were to get a square root, like let's say your distance your distance resulted in like square root 24, you cannot leave it. You got to break it down, right? So that's 4 and 6. 4 would square root is 2. Square root 6. That's how you would have to format any square root that can be simplified, okay? Make sure that you know how to simplify your radicals, okay? It'll get you. If the square root is already there, so if I said square root 25, that answer is 5, and it is only 5. The only time we bring in a plus minus is if it says x squared equals 25, so you bring in the square root. When you're bringing in the square root to solve, that's when we plus minus it, okay? So just the natural square root, there's no plus minus. Only when it's an equation and we bring in the square root, like even if there was x to the fourth, and an even exponent, whatever, that's when we bring in the plus and minus, okay?
Would we have to put plus minus in front of it?
No. All right. How we use this is in a couple ways. One is coordinate problems. So in these kinds of questions, they're going to give you 3 coordinate points that form a triangle. It's going to ask you to find the lengths of the 3 sides, and then it's going to ask you to classify it. You can be classified in 4 different ways. One is if it's a right triangle. One if it's isosceles, equilateral, and then the last would be it's none of those, okay? If it's a right triangle, yes, you can determine it from slopes. So I could find the slopes of the 2 lines and show that they are opposite reciprocals, which shows that they're 90 degrees. But that's not what we're doing in this section. In this section, we're talking about lengths. So we're talking about sides. So in order to show something's a right triangle, we're going to find the lengths of the 3 sides and then show that it satisfies a squared plus b squared equals c squared. C being the biggest, okay? If I'm trying to figure out if it's isosceles, that one's kind of easy. I just need to look for 2 sides that have the same length. And if it's equilateral, all 3 sides have the same length. Okay. So on your quiz, it's going to say, here's coordinate points, find the lengths of 3 sides, then determine what kind of triangle it is. Okay. The other way you'll see it is like this. Show that these coordinates form a right triangle. So it's already telling you it's a right triangle. You have to show that it is. And those look like B's, but they are 6s. This font is cute, but confusing. Yes. Okay. Those are 6s. So do you have to draw it out? No. But could it help you? Yes, because it would help you figure out which one's my hypotenuse, okay? So if I were to draw this out, I'd go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, that's my A. 6, 0, that's my B. And 2, 0, that's my C. So now from this picture, 1, not only can I count my sides that are vertical and horizontal, 2, I know from this that my hypotenuse should be that AC side. So if it's vertical or horizontal, like literally just count it out. This is up 3, and this is the difference between those is 4. Your quiz will not be vertical or horizontal. You'll have to do the distance formula for the 3 sides. Now who remembers the triples and can tell me what that last side should be? Good. 3, 4, 5 is a triple. That's what AC should be. But we can't assume that that's what it is. We're going to find it. So we're going to find AC using the distance formula. Here's my x1, y1, x2, y2. I get 2 minus 6 squared plus 0 minus 3 squared. Negative 4 squared plus negative 3 squared. 16 plus 9, square root 25. When we were right, that side length is 5. Now to show that it is, that word show means prove it with work. I'm going to show that a squared plus b squared equals c squared. A and c don't matter, so I'm just going to go 3 squared. A and b don't matter. 3 squared plus 4 squared equals 5 squared. So 9 plus 16 should equal 25, and 25 does equal 25. So on your homework, when it says show that, you cannot just plot it and say it looks like a right triangle. That's not what I'm looking for. You got to get the distance formula and the Pythagorean theorem practice. We still good? Yes? All right, last topic in today's notes is the standard form of a circle. So the equation for the standard form of a circle is x minus h squared plus y minus k squared equals r squared, where hk is your center and r is your radius. And not on your AP exam, but let's say on a standardized test, you might just see something as simple as like x minus 2 squared plus y plus 1 squared equals 9. And it might say, what's the center? And you would tell me it's what? Good, 2, negative 1. And it might ask you, what's the radius? And you would tell me it's what? 3, good. And it might ask you to draw it. Like that might be something you could see on a standardized test. Again, not on your AP exam, but maybe there. Or I could give you the center and the radius and you would have to give me the equation. We might also work backwards that way, okay? But now we're going to apply it this way. So find the equation of a circle that passes through 3, 4, that has a center of negative 2, 1. So my standard form x minus h squared plus y minus k squared equals r squared. So what I need for this equation is my center and my radius squared, right? What information did I already give you? The centers. So the center is my HK. What you don't have is the radius. How could I find it? I could do the distance formula from the center to the point on the circle. What else? Not midpoint. Midpoint would be, which is the next one? Like if I got the end points of the diameter, I could use the midpoint to get the center. I would highly recommend this method, which is plug in the x, the y, the h, the k. So my 3, 4 is my xy. And my negative 2, 1 is my hk. And I'm going to plug those in. 3 minus a negative 2 becomes plus 2 squared. Plus 4 minus 1 squared equals r squared. 5 squared plus 3 squared equals r squared. 25 plus 9 equals r squared, and r squared is 34. Now, if I had asked for the radius, then I'd have to square root it, okay? And in this case, we would never say it's negative because a radius can't have a negative length, right? Like, yes, if I was solving r squared equals 34, it should be plus and minus the square root of 34. But in that case, we would never. But it's not even asking for the radius, so I'm not going to worry about square rooting because in my initial standard equation, this r is squared. So I'm going to keep it squared and just plug in the h, the k, and the r squared. So I get x minus, and be careful to plug in the right one, minus a negative 2 becomes plus 2 squared, plus y minus 1 squared equals 34. Correct. It means it's actually the circle would pass, like the circle that you draw would pass right through it. Still good? Okay, last one. This time it says find the equation of a circle whose diameter has the endpoints 3, 4, and negative 2, 1. So what didn't I give you this time? The radius or the center. How could I find the center? Midpoint between the endpoints. So I'll find the midpoint with these two. So 3 plus a negative 2 over 2 and 4 plus 1 over 2. And I get 1/2 and 5/2. That's your HK. Now I gotta find the radius. And there's really 3 ways you could do it. Give me one way. You could find the distance between them, and then you gotta cut it in half. That's one. What else could you do? Plug in that midpoint and one of the points. And then the third way is find the distance from the center to one of those points. I've been doing this a long time, and the one that lands on the least amount of mistakes is the plugging in. The one with the most amount of mistakes is finding the distance between the endpoints and then cutting in half. Because if you have to do that, sometimes you get a fraction, then you got to square root it. Like, it gets ugly. Don't do it. Let me save you the trouble, okay? And don't be like, I'm going to prove her wrong, and I'm going to do it, and I'm going to get it right, because then you're going to make a mistake. And I don't want that to happen. So my biggest piece of advice is stick with the plug-in. So this is my HK. And then when I go to pick my XY, I could choose either point. And if I could give you another piece of advice, is if you could avoid the negatives, do it. So pick the 3, 4. As smart as you guys are, if you make a dumb mistake, it's usually related to a negative, okay? So if you can avoid them, do it. It's not going to be pretty because there's fractions, right? But we could do it. All right, so my X is 3, my Y is 4, my H is 1/2, my K is 5/2. So I'm going to do 3 minus 1/2 squared plus 4 minus 5/2 squared equals R squared. Now I got to find the least common denominator, then square it. So my 3 becomes 6 over 2. And 6 over 2 minus 1 over 2 is 5 over 2. My 4 becomes 8 over 2. And 8 over 2 minus 5 over 2 is 3 over 2 equals R squared. What's 5 over 2 squared? Good. 25 over 4. Square both. Plus, what's 3 over 2 squared? 9 over 4. At least they have the same denominator. So I get 34 over 4 equals R squared. Can I leave it as 34 over 4? Nope. It's simplifiable. 17 over 2. So then my equation, I'm going to be careful and make sure I pick the HK, not one of the XYs, and the center, and the radius squared. So I get X minus 1/2 squared plus Y minus 5/2 squared equals 17 over 2. Questions? Okay.